I trusted the man my daughter loved until a small detail in my kitchen revealed a deadly truth. What followed was a silent fight to save her life, uncover betrayal, and face the cost of trust. This is one of those inspirational stories where a mother's instinct changes everything and reminds us why inspirational stories often begin at home. Before we go any further, may God bless you and keep you. And right now, let us know where you're watching from. My name is Marianne Collins. I am an African American woman in my early 50s, and I have lived in Savannah, Georgia for more than 30 years. A beautiful, old city where everything looks so slow and gentle that it's easy to believe nothing truly bad could ever happen here. I used to believe that. My daughter, Alyssa, moved back in with me after her divorce. What I did not expect was that she would also bring a new man into my home, Marcus, whom Alyssa described as a different kind of beginning. Marcus worked in logistics at the port. He was tall, soft-spoken, always called me ma'am, and never failed to appear respectful. I remember my first impression clearly. At least my child had chosen a decent man. I had no reason to question anything when Marcus offered to take over the cooking. He said he enjoyed being in the kitchen, that it helped him unwind after work. Alyssa laughed and told me I was finally retired from the stove. The first dinners were calm and comforting. The smell of baked chicken, bean soup, cornbread. Marcus always packed Alyssa's lunch neatly in sealed containers. He even made me a smaller portion easier on digestion, he said. I thought it was thoughtfulness. Until that Thursday morning. That day, I woke up earlier than usual because I couldn't sleep. Alyssa had already left the house at 5 o'clock to take her son to school early. Marcus was still asleep on the sofa. I walked into the kitchen to make coffee and noticed a gray fabric bag sitting on the table. At first, I thought it belonged to Alyssa, but when I looked closer, I realized it was Marcus's lunch bag, the one he carried to work every single day. Except that morning, it was still at home. I had no intention of opening it, truly. I am the kind of person who respects other people's privacy. But when I picked it up to move it aside, it felt lighter than usual, and the zipper was already open. A strange feeling ran straight down my spine. I pulled the zipper just a little more. Inside was a clear plastic container. I opened it and saw the familiar food, stewed fish and white rice. But in one corner of the container, there was something that made me freeze. A fine, uneven layer of pale gray powder clung to the edge of the plastic. Not salt, not pepper. It had no strong smell, but it looked wrong. I remember standing there for a long time, staring at it, telling myself I was imagining things. I have lived long enough to know that women of color like me are often labeled paranoid or overreacting. But then I remembered Alyssa's stomach pains. I remembered how noticeably thinner she had become over just a few months. I remembered the evenings she held her stomach and said it was probably work stress. I remembered the doctor brushing it off as common digestive issues. I set the container down on the table. My heart began to beat faster. I didn't dare throw the food away. I didn't dare touch the powder directly. I closed the lid, put everything back into the bag, and sat down in a kitchen chair. That was when Marcus woke up. He walked into the kitchen and smiled lightly. Did I forget my lunch bag? I nodded, forcing my voice to stay steady. Looks like it. Marcus glanced at the bag on the table. Just for a second, but I saw it clearly. His expression changed. Not panic, not surprise. Caution. I'll just bring something else today, he said, faster than usual, reaching for the bag. I stopped him, Marcus, I said quietly. There's something strange in the container. The kitchen went completely still. He looked at me, really looked at me. 1 second, 2 seconds. Marcus took a deep breath, then let out a small laugh. Probably just some seasoning that clumped together. I have lived more than 50 years. I raised my child on my own. I worked in spaces where Black women learn to read what is never said out loud, and in that moment, every instinct in my body was screaming that he was lying. But I didn't confront him. I didn't ask another question. I just nodded. Maybe Marcus left the house shortly after, leaving me alone in the quiet kitchen. I sat there for a long time, watching sunlight spill through the window, wondering when this house, once the safest place I knew, had begun to smell like danger. I didn't know exactly what I was facing. I only knew one thing. If I was wrong, I could tear my family apart. But if I was right, then someone I loved was in serious danger. And from that moment on, I understood that I had no choice but to keep my eyes wide open and my mouth shut. Because sometimes you have to pretend you didn't see anything at all. I didn't say anything to Alyssa that morning. After Marcus left the house, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, my hand resting on the lunch bag as if it might somehow answer the questions screaming in my head. I knew that if I spoke too soon without proof, I would only create panic. And in families of Black women like ours, panic has never been a luxury we can afford for long. But I also knew something else. I couldn't ignore this. That afternoon, Alyssa came home earlier than usual. She looked exhausted. Her skin was dull. Dark circles sat heavy under her eyes. She said she'd felt nauseous and had a headache all day, probably from the heat and work stress. I looked at my daughter, and there was only one thought in my mind. If I'm wrong, I'll destroy my family. But if I'm right? I told Alyssa to change her clothes and said I wanted to take her to the hospital. She laughed, said I was worrying too much. I didn't laugh back. I just said, please, just so your mother can have some peace of mind. At the emergency room at Memorial Health, I sat beside her, my hand gripping hers tightly. I noticed how carefully the nurse asked about how long the symptoms had lasted, what she'd been eating, whether she'd lost weight. Alyssa answered casually, like it was all just minor inconvenience. I didn't see it that way. When the doctor returned with the preliminary blood test results, I knew something was wrong the moment I saw his face. He didn't sit down. He stood there, holding the chart, and spoke in a voice so measured it was frightening. We've detected elevated levels of heavy metals in Alyssa's blood. My throat went dry. Heavy metals. What does that mean? We can't be certain yet, but there are signs of prolonged exposure. Not a single incident. Multiple exposures over a period of time. Alyssa laughed nervously. What are you saying? I don't work in a factory. The doctor looked at me, then back at my daughter. We need to keep her for further testing. And I need to ask, have there been any recent changes in her diet? I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. In that moment, I didn't think about Marcus. I thought about the peaceful dinners, the packed lunches, the gentle words. I thought about the gray powder clinging to the edge of that container. And fear settled into my bones so deeply that my hands began to shake. When Alyssa was taken for more extensive testing, the doctor asked me to step into a small room nearby. He closed the door, sat across from me, and lowered his voice. Mrs. Collins, there's a possibility you need to prepare yourself for. I nodded. I had been preparing since morning. Based on the initial indicators, this may be food-related poisoning. If that's the case, the source isn't environmental. It's human. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I asked only one question, the kind that follows you for the rest of your life. Is my daughter's life in danger? The doctor paused for a second. If this had continued for a few more months, the answer could have been yes. My world collapsed into a single point. My daughter. I left the doctor's room numb. I sat by Alyssa's bed as fluids ran into her arm. She was asleep, her face paler than I had ever seen it. I looked at her and faced a truth I had avoided for years. I had not protected her well enough. That evening, when Marcus arrived at the hospital wearing perfect concern, I watched him with new eyes. He held Alyssa's hand, spoke to the doctors, acted anxious and attentive. But I noticed one very small detail. When the doctor mentioned additional testing to identify the source of the poisoning, Marcus's jaw tightened. No one else noticed. I did. On the drive home, I said nothing. I let Marcus talk about how it was probably seafood or old water pipes. I just listened and remembered that night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, replaying every memory, every sentence, every meal. I remembered that Marcus had always insisted on cooking, always refused my help, always said, Alyssa needs to rest. Near dawn, I made a decision that made my chest ache. I would not confront him. I would not ask questions. I would pretend to trust him. Because if someone was poisoning my daughter, then the most dangerous thing I could do, and I understood then, from the moment Alyssa lay in that hospital bed, that our lives had crossed into a different phase, a phase where the truth could kill and silence could save a life. Before we go on, if you still believe in your heart that God is watching over you, always working things out in ways you can't see, then right now, drop an amen in the comments. 'Cause who knows? The moment you write it, a blessing might be slipping quietly into your life. Now then, let's get back to the story. After Alyssa was temporarily discharged to continue monitoring at home, I brought her back in a state I had never known in all my years as a mother. Knowing my child was in danger and being unable to say it out loud, Marcus drove. Alyssa sat in the back seat, her head resting against the window, too exhausted to ask questions. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the familiar river road, feeling as though I were moving through a completely different city. Savannah looked the same: oak trees draped in moss, quiet old houses. But inside me, everything had shifted. When we pulled up to the house, Marcus rushed around to open the door for Alyssa, careful in a way that would look, to anyone watching, like the picture of a devoted husband. I found myself wondering, what if I was wrong about him? That question followed me the entire evening. Marcus made a light dinner, saying the doctor had warned Alyssa to eat carefully. He carried the tray all the way up to her room himself. I stood in the kitchen, watching from a distance, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the tray from his hands. I wanted to ask him outright, "What have you done to my daughter?" But I did nothing. Because deep down, one part of my mind was still fighting back in desperation. What if I'm wrong? What if this is all coincidence? What if I destroy my daughter's family over suspicion, with no proof? I am a Black woman raised in a family that taught me not to jump to conclusions, not to cause trouble, not to let emotions ruin everything. And now, those very lessons were binding my hands. That night, I lay awake. I heard Marcus moving around in the kitchen late, cabinets opening, water running, small sounds. But in the silence, they echoed like knocks inside my head. The next morning, I got up early. I acted normal, made coffee, fixed breakfast. Marcus walked into the kitchen and greeted me calmly. "Did you sleep okay? Fair enough?" I said. We stood across from each other with the kitchen counter between us. I watched every movement. The way he avoided direct eye contact when he spoke to me. The way he positioned himself to block the view of the stove and pots. I began noticing things I had never paid attention to before. Marcus had always controlled the kitchen. He didn't like anyone nearby when he cooked. He said he had his own way of doing things. I used to think it was just personality. Now, I wasn't so sure. I started doing something I never imagined I would do: memorizing. Memorizing when Marcus went into the kitchen. Memorizing the days Alyssa seemed more tired than usual. Memorizing the meals I didn't eat with them. I didn't write anything down. I kept it all in my head, like an invisible notebook. Because if I left evidence behind, and if Marcus really was hiding something, I couldn't risk him finding out. Living like this, being on guard in my own home, drained me. One afternoon, while Alyssa slept, I called Ruth, my closest friend since college. I didn't tell her everything. I just asked roundabout questions about heavy metal poisoning. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Marianne, who does the cooking in that house?" I didn't answer. My silence was enough. "Listen," she said slowly. "If this is prolonged exposure, then it isn't an accident. And whoever's responsible is unlikely to stop unless they're forced to. I hung up the phone with my hands shaking. For the first time, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. Marcus might be trying to kill my daughter. The thought made me nauseous. But what frightened me more was the question that followed. If that's true, what do I do? Report him? Tell Alyssa? She wouldn't believe me. Confront him? I could make him more dangerous. And then a bitter truth surfaced. In situations like this, the truth isn't always the strongest weapon. Silence is. That evening, when Marcus said he was going to make soup for Alyssa, I surprised him by saying, "Let me help." He turned and looked at me. Something flickered in his eyes too fast to name, then disappeared. "No need. You should rest." I smiled. I like being in the kitchen. It's been a while. The air in the room grew heavy. Finally, we stood side by side, cooking the same pot of soup. I watched his every move. Nothing unusual. No strange powder. No suspicious gestures. But when Marcus turned away to grab the salt, I noticed a small jar sitting near the edge of the shelf, unlabeled. My heart slammed against my chest. I didn't touch it. I didn't stare. I simply memorized where it was. That night, after everyone was asleep, I quietly went down to the kitchen. I stood in front of that jar for a long time. I didn't open it. I just looked at it. And in that moment, I made a decision I knew would change everything. I would not rush the truth. I would not make him nervous. I would let him believe he was safe. Because if Marcus truly was behind all of this, then only if he believed no one suspected him would I have a chance to see his full, unmasked self. And I understood one thing clearly. From this point on, I was no longer just a mother worried about her child. I was stepping into a dangerous game where one wrong move could cost Alyssa her life. But there was no turning back. There is something strange that happens when you begin to suspect the right person. Details that once meant nothing suddenly become terrifyingly sharp. After the night I saw the small, unlabeled jar in the kitchen, I stopped sleeping soundly. Not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I was afraid of the quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over a house where everyone believes nothing is wrong, while in reality, every breath may already be calculated. The next morning, Marcus said he was leaving for work earlier than usual. Alyssa was still weak, so I stayed home to care for her. When the door closed behind Marcus, I stood still for a moment, listening to the sound of his car pulling away from the cobblestone street in front of the house. Then I did something I had never done before in my own home. I began to learn about Marcus, not snooping like in the movies. I didn't open drawers or dig through personal belongings. I started with the things he wouldn't think mattered. Bills. On the small desk near the window, there was a neat stack of papers clipped together. I recognized Marcus's handwriting, tidy, careful. Phone bills, insurance statements, a brown envelope from a local bank. I didn't open anything. I only read the name, Marcus Hill. The name echoed in my mind differently now. No longer my daughter's boyfriend, but a name with weight, one that carried history and things behind it. That afternoon, while Alyssa slept, I took my car keys and drove out. I told her I was going to pick up medication. Instead, I drove to an insurance office near downtown Savannah, the same place Alyssa had once asked me to help with paperwork years earlier. I didn't ask about Marcus. I asked about Alyssa. I'm her mother. I have that right. The insurance clerk was a young woman, polite and efficient. She pulled up the file and showed me a summary of a life insurance policy Alyssa had signed 6 months earlier. I don't remember how long I sat there. The amount was not small. For a family like ours, it was life-changing money. The primary beneficiary was Marcus. I asked, my voice rough. When did she sign this? 6 months ago, ma'am. All signatures are complete. 6 months. I left the office with my mind hollow. 6 months ago was when Alyssa started feeling tired. 6 months ago was when Marcus began cooking more often. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces were coming together on their own, and I no longer had the strength to push them away. That afternoon, I stopped by the public library. I know it sounds old-fashioned, but I grew up in a time when if you wanted the truth about someone, you started with what was public. I searched for Marcus Hill in old records, local newspapers, public databases. It took almost 2 hours. Then I found something. Marcus Hill had once lived in Jacksonville, Florida, 10 years earlier. There was a small article, nearly forgotten, about a personal bankruptcy tied to a failed transportation business. Marcus's name appeared on a list of debtors, along with a brief note. Former business partner died under unclear circumstances. I read that line 3 times. No details, no conclusion. Just one sentence, like a faded ink stain, but enough to make my stomach tighten. That evening, Marcus came home late. He said there had been an emergency at the port. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from work. It was the tension of someone carrying too much in his head. During dinner, Marcus suddenly said, "I've been thinking. If something were to happen in the future, I want to make sure Alyssa is taken care of." I looked up at him. "What kind of something?" He smiled and shook his head. "Just planning ahead." That sentence sent a chill through me, because people with plans love to say they're just planning ahead. That night, I checked the things Marcus usually carried. In a bag hanging over a chair, I found a thin stack of papers. Not letters, not contracts, copies. A lease agreement for a small storage unit near the port, in Marcus's name, signed 7 months earlier. I didn't know what the storage unit was for, but I knew one thing. Someone under financial strain doesn't rent extra space without a reason. By then, the picture was becoming clearer, and that terrified me as much as it angered me. Marcus was not just a man who loved my daughter. He was a man with a troubled financial past, newly named as Alyssa's insurance beneficiary, and in complete control of her food. Motive was no longer speculation. It was right in front of me. And yet, in that moment, I understood a brutal truth. Motive alone does not save lives. I needed proof. And to get proof, I needed time. So I returned to my role, an overly worried older mother, a woman who didn't understand financial matters, a trusting mother-in-law. I asked Marcus naive questions. I let him explain. I let him believe he was still in control. All the while, another plan was taking shape in my mind. Not a plan of confrontation, not a plan of exposure, but a plan to let Marcus step into the light on his own. Because I understood one thing clearly. If he had already gone this far, then sooner or later, greed would make him careless. And when that happened, I had to be ready. There are moments when silence isn't fear. Silence is preparation. After the day I uncovered the insurance policy and traces of Marcus's past, I understood that I was no longer standing in the position of a confused mother. I was facing a clear choice. Either act impulsively and lose every chance to protect Alyssa, or practice a kind of patience so ruthless it would hurt me more than anyone else. I chose the second. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. Savannah was still wrapped in fog. I made coffee the way I always did and set a cup on the table for Marcus before he came down to the kitchen. I smiled, asked him about work at the port, listened to the smooth answers that sounded rehearsed. Inside, I began to count. I counted how many times he entered the kitchen. I counted how long he was alone with the pots and pans. I counted the days Alyssa felt worse after dinner. I wrote nothing down. I left no trace that could be discovered. Everything stayed in my head, like small stones carefully lined up. That afternoon, while Alyssa slept, I drove to an old pharmacy in the outskirts of town, a place where I'd known the owner for years. I asked vague questions about chemicals, heavy metals, substances that could cause nausea and weakness over long exposure. He didn't sell me anything, but he told me enough to understand one thing. These substances don't require large doses to kill someone. They only require time. That evening, Marcus offered to cook a stew he said was easy on the stomach. I agreed. But before he started, I said I wanted to make herbal tea for Alyssa. I stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, positioning myself where I could see every movement. Marcus didn't do anything obvious. No strange jar, no rushed gestures. I almost thought I'd been wrong until I realized he was waiting for me to turn my back. Just a brief moment, but long enough for me to see his hand reach toward the upper shelf where the unlabeled spice jars sat. My heart slammed. I turned back immediately, pretending to ask a question. I didn't confront him. I simply nodded. That night, after everyone was asleep, I went down to the kitchen. I didn't touch the jar. I only shifted it slightly, just enough to know the next morning whether it had been handled. The next morning, the jar was gone. I didn't need another explanation. From that day on, I began making small changes. Changes only a controlling person would notice. I adjusted meal times. I changed dishes. I offered to cook a few meals myself to help Alyssa feel safe. Marcus didn't object, but I could see the tension settling into his shoulders. And then the danger escalated. One evening, Alyssa began vomiting violently. I took her into the bathroom, held her hair back. In the mirror, I saw my own face pale, aged by 10 years in just a few weeks. When Marcus stepped in, I looked him straight in the eye and said, maybe tomorrow she should go back to the hospital. But I saw it. No need, he said quickly. The doctor said rest. That night, when Marcus stepped outside to take a phone call, I did something I had weighed for nights. I kept a sample. Not the whole meal, just a small spoonful, wrapped tightly in foil and placed in an old freezer bag at the back of the freezer. My hands shook as I did it, knowing I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I didn't know exactly how I would use it. I only knew this: evidence doesn't appear on its own. It has to be preserved. In the days that followed, I noticed Marcus growing impatient. He asked more questions, watched me more closely. Sometimes he suggested I rest or stop worrying so much. Those words once comforted me. Now they chilled me. One rainy afternoon, Marcus said he was going on a short work trip. I didn't explain everything. I only said I needed to know where someone could discreetly test a food sample. Ruth was quiet for a long time, then gave me a name, a small lab that accepted private testing. That night, I sat alone in the living room, listening to rain tap against the windows. I thought about Alyssa, about her childhood, about the times I hadn't been there when she needed me most. I thought about Marcus, his polite smile, his carefully measured words, and I thought about the most terrifying truth of all. If I was wrong, I could destroy multiple lives. But if I did nothing, I could lose my daughter. The next morning, I delivered the sample. I told no one. I showed nothing. I returned home and resumed my role. Marcus came back earlier than expected. He said the trip was canceled. When he stepped into the kitchen, I knew instantly he was looking for something. His eyes scanned the room, the freezer, the high shelf, then me. I smiled and asked, "Are you hungry?" Marcus smiled back, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. That evening, Alyssa barely ate. I gave her medication the doctor had prescribed, medication Marcus didn't know I still had. I didn't tell him. I didn't need permission. When Alyssa finally slept more peacefully, I sat alone in the dark and understood something clearly. The game had begun. No more suspicion. No more guessing. The moment I kept that sample, I stepped into a confrontation the other person didn't yet know he was part of. And in games like this, the winner isn't the strongest, it's the most patient. We put a whole lot of time and heart into bringing this story to life. If you don't like it, go on and hit that like button. And if you do like it, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Now then, the results came on a gray morning. I was standing in the kitchen, cutting fruit for Alyssa, when my phone vibrated. I looked out the window, where early fog still clung to the oak branches, then answered, "Mrs. Collins." The man's voice was low and steady. My palms were damp with sweat. "Please be direct," I said. There was a very brief pause, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "The food sample contains traces of a rare metal compound used in port-related industrial work. It's not something that would normally appear in a household kitchen." And he hesitated. The dosage is small enough to be hard to detect immediately, but sufficient to cause physical deterioration if administered repeatedly. I closed my eyes. One breath. Two. Could it be fatal? I asked. If it continues. From that moment on, everything in my house changed color. These were no longer scattered suspicions. This was the truth. I looked up and saw Marcus standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He had no idea what I had just heard, but I knew this. From this second forward, I was living beside someone who could kill my daughter. You look tired, he said, concern perfectly in place. Didn't sleep well, I replied, smiling just enough. That's how it is with age, Marcus nodded. His eyes flicked briefly across the counter, toward the freezer. I noticed he stood closer to the stove than usual, as if shielding a particular corner. I didn't change our routine right away. I knew the person I was facing was used to control. Sudden shifts would make him alert. Instead, I began creating deliberate randomness. Some days I cooked, some days Marcus did. Some meals I ate with Alyssa. Other times I claimed an upset stomach. I kept the rhythm steady, like a clock no one could read. But Marcus changed. One night he suggested switching to a lighter soup. Another night he said the doctor recommended Alyssa drink more juice he prepared himself. Every suggestion sounded reasonable, and that was what made it terrifying. I began counting down in my head. Day 1 after the lab results. Alyssa seemed more alert. Day 2. The headaches returned. Day 3. Marcus made juice in the morning. A new habit. On day 4, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The unlabeled spice jar had reappeared, but in a different place. Not on the high shelf. In a lower drawer within reach of a child. That wasn't carelessness. That was a shift in strategy. That night, while Marcus was in the bathroom, I quickly picked up the jar. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I simply smelled it. A faint metallic note, almost nothing. But I already knew what it was. I put the jar back exactly where it had been. And I understood. The next day, Alyssa collapsed in the living room. I called for an ambulance. Marcus reached her before I did, lifting her, calling her name. The performance was flawless. But I noticed something else. When the paramedic asked what Alyssa had eaten, Marcus answered for her. I stepped in, my voice calm, and the medication the doctor prescribed. Marcus looked at me. At the hospital, the doctors ordered another round of tests. I sat in the hallway, gripping my phone. Ruth texted to ask if I was okay. I didn't reply. An hour later, the doctor called me in. Her metal levels are higher than last time, he said, not drastically, but enough to concern us. I asked the question I had prepared for. If the source isn't removed, what happens? The doctor met my eyes. Her body won't be able to sustain it. When I returned to the room, Marcus was sitting by Alyssa's bed, holding her hand. On any other day, that image might have comforted me. That night, I decided to set a small trap. I told Marcus I was going to stay overnight with a friend to rest. I asked him to take good care of Alyssa. I truly left the house, but only circled the block and parked at the end of the street, where I could see the kitchen through a narrow slice of window. I sat in the car, my heart pounding so hard, I felt sure the whole neighborhood could hear it. The kitchen light came on. Marcus entered. I saw him take out the unlabeled jar. I saw him measure, not with a spoon, but by feel, a pinch smaller than before. Then he paused, as if reconsidering. Then he added a little more. In that moment, everything inside me split in two. Overwhelming terror and icy clarity. I didn't rush in. I didn't scream. I stayed still. Because I knew that if I broke that scene, I would lose everything, the evidence, the opportunity, and possibly Alyssa's life. The next morning, I returned home as if nothing had happened. I told Alyssa the doctor had advised avoiding juice for a few days. I gave her the medication I had, kept the safe dosage. Marcus asked questions. I answered. But I felt his eyes on me more than before. That afternoon, the lab called again. They were ready to prepare a full report if I needed it. I ended the call and looked around the house. Family photos on the walls, meals that once meant comfort. I understood that I was standing at the edge of a turning point. If I took one more step forward, there would be no way back. If I slowed down, Alyssa might not have time left. That evening, Marcus offered to cook a special stew. I smiled and said, "She'll eat what her mother makes." Marcus nodded, but his eyes never left the pot. When Alyssa fell asleep, I sat alone in the dark and called Ruth. I spoke briefly, just enough for her to understand that I needed an official path. Quiet. "No early alarms," Marianne Ruth said softly. "If he's increased the dose, it means he's afraid of losing something. And frightened people make mistakes." I looked out the window. Savannah was unnervingly quiet. "Then I'll let him be afraid," I said. I ended the call knowing that from this moment on, the game had entered its final phase. No more scattered gathering. It was time to build the frame, to let the other person step into it and find no way out. And inside that house, between familiar walls, I began preparing for what I hoped I would never have to do: end the silence with a truth that could not be denied. There was a very clear moment when I knew I was no longer the passive one. Not when the lab results came back, not when I watched Marcus increase the dose in the kitchen, but when I realized this. He was starting to be afraid. That fear didn't show up in words. It showed itself in small details. The way Marcus checked in more often than usual, the way he stayed close whenever I used my phone, the way he tried to be kind to the point of excess. People with nothing to hide don't need to perform like that. That was where I began to build the trap. That morning, I told Marcus the doctor had called me. I didn't lie outright. I just trimmed the truth. "They said Alyssa's numbers still aren't stable," I said, letting just enough worry seep into my voice. "If things don't improve, they'll transfer her case to another specialist." Complicated stuff. Marcus didn't answer right away. He turned his back, washed his hands longer than necessary. The water ran hard, splashing against the sink. That day, I called Ruth. This time, I didn't circle around it. I told her plainly that I had food samples, lab results, and reason to believe someone in the house was trying to harm Alyssa. Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that let me know I wasn't alone anymore. "Marianne, if you've gone this far, the next step isn't confrontation. It's letting him make the mistake himself. Not out of fear, but because I needed something Marcus couldn't deny. A moment. An action. A choice he made on his own." I slipped back into my familiar role. The anxious older mother, overwhelmed by medical paperwork, clueless about legal matters. I asked Marcus naive questions about insurance, about what would happen if Alyssa had to stop working for a while. "How would we manage?" Marcus answered smoothly. But in his eyes, I saw calculation. 2 days later, I did something risky. I revealed half a plan. I told Marcus I was considering taking Alyssa to stay with me somewhere else, near people I trusted, so I could monitor her health more closely. I didn't say when. I just said possibly soon. Marcus reacted faster than I expected. "There's no need," he said, his voice sharper than usual. "I can take care of her here. You traveling back and forth is too much." I nodded, appearing uncertain. "But the doctor said environment matters too." Marcus went quiet. The silence stretched long enough for me to know I had touched what he was afraid of losing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the kitchen, not sneaking, confident, as if the person believed no one was watching. I didn't go down. I let it happen. The next morning, Marcus woke early. He made juice for Alyssa, a habit I had been trying to limit. After Marcus left for work, I opened the freezer. I checked the old sample. Then I kept a new one. This time, from the juice, I knew I was crossing into the most dangerous territory of all, knowing too much. At noon, I drove to meet Ruth. She introduced me to an old friend of hers, a retired investigator. living quietly outside the city. I didn't say Marcus's name. I told the story as a hypothetical. He listened carefully, then said, "This isn't someone acting on impulse. This is a person with a plan. And when that plan is threatened, they speed things up." Those words stayed with me all the way home. That evening, I decided to bait him. I told Marcus that Alyssa had a follow-up appointment scheduled for the weekend. I deliberately let it slip that I'd be bringing all the paperwork, test results, reports, and possibly even the insurance lawyer. Marcus didn't ask any questions, but he didn't leave the kitchen all through dinner either. He watched every spoonful Alyssa ate, every sip she took. I watched him and understood. He believed his time was running out. That night, I pretended to go to bed early. I left my door slightly open. I set my phone to record, not for a confession, but for sounds. The opening of a jar, a lid twisting, running water, around 1 in the morning. The next morning, Alyssa was noticeably weaker. I called the doctor and said we were coming in immediately. Marcus offered to come along. I refused. "For the first time, I'll take her." I said, "You should rest." Marcus looked at me. His eyes no longer hid anything. It was the look of a man realizing he was losing control. On the way to the hospital, I called Ruth. "It's time." At the hospital, I handed over the new sample. I asked for urgent testing. I said plainly that I suspected someone in the family. The doctor studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. That afternoon, Marcus showed up at the hospital, breathless, saying he was worried. I didn't send him away. I let him stay. Because traps don't snap when you pull the string. They snap when the prey believes it's still safe. When the doctor entered the room and said the levels had spiked sharply, I saw Marcus go pale. I looked at him and knew. That night, when Marcus left the hospital to get some things, I sat beside Alyssa's bed, holding her hand, and made myself a promise. No matter what happens next, no matter how ugly the truth becomes, I will not stop halfway. Because once you set a trap to save someone you love, you don't get to hesitate. And I knew this with certainty. Marcus would make one more move. The only question was whether that move would be enough to bury him. There is one thing I learned in those days. When someone has gone too far, they don't stop out of fear. They become reckless. The night Alyssa was kept in the hospital for observation, Marcus went back to the house under the excuse of getting personal items. Not when everything was already slipping out of his control. I sat in the waiting area, my phone clenched in my hand, my eyes fixed on the doors. I had told the doctor everything I knew. No circling, no softening the truth. I talked about the food samples, the juice, the escalating dosage. The doctor listened, his expression tightening, then said something that made my chest seize. "Mrs. Collins, if what you're saying is accurate, then this person will not stop until the target is no longer a threat." The target, my daughter. That night, I didn't leave the hospital. I curled up on a chair, unable to close my eyes. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. A message from Marcus. "I'm back at the house. There are some important documents of Alyssa's. I'll bring them to you." I stared at the screen. I knew this was the final move. Not to save Alyssa, but to reclaim control one last time. I didn't respond right away. I called Ruth. I said only one thing. "He's about to do something." Ruth didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way," she said. "Don't be alone." But waiting was no longer an option. About an hour later, Marcus appeared at the hospital. He was carrying a small bag. When he saw me, he smiled, the same smile that once made me trust him. "I brought a few things Alyssa needs," he said softly. I nodded. I didn't stop him. I let him walk into the room. I stayed at the doorway, watching. Marcus set the bag down and leaned in to talk to Alyssa. She was still weak, but awake. I saw her glance at me, a look full of questions. I nodded ever so slightly, as if to say, "I'm here." Marcus opened the bag, pulled out a few items. Then he took out a bottle of juice, new label, harmless looking. I made this for you, he said. The doctor said you should drink more fluids. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might betray me. I stepped into the room. Let me give it to her, I said. Marcus paused. Just a fraction of a second. But enough. It's okay, he replied. I know how to prepare it. The air in the room thickened. I looked at the bottle. I looked at his hand. Then I looked Marcus straight in the eyes. Give it to me, I repeated, my voice calm to the point of cold. Marcus smiled, a tight, brittle smile. He set the bottle on the table but didn't let go. The two of us stood there like a chess game that had reached its final move. Marianne, he said, using my name for the first time. You're under too much stress. I didn't answer. I reached for the bottle and deliberately let it slip. The bottle shattered on the floor. Liquid spread across the tiles. The metallic smell was faint, but to me, it was as unmistakable as smoke. Marcus took a step back. Oh my God, he said. What are you doing? I'm sorry, I said evenly. My hands are shaking. The door flew open. A doctor and a nurse stepped in, drawn by the noise. I looked at them and said the sentence I had been preparing for a long time. Please secure that bottle. I believe it's unsafe. The room went dead, silent. Marcus turned toward me. His expression changed completely. No performance, no politeness, just desperation cornered. What are you talking about? He said quickly. Don't make a scene. I have lab results I cut in. I have previous samples, and now I have this. The doctor looked at Marcus, then at me. We'll test it, he said. Marcus scoffed. It's just juice. Then you don't need to worry, I replied. In that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Naked fear. Marcus turned to Alyssa. You know I would never hurt you. Right. Alyssa looked at him. For a long time. Then she said, her voice weak but steady, I don't know anymore. That sentence landed like a blade. Marcus stepped back. He shook his head. You're all misunderstanding this. No, I said quietly. You calculated it. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Because at that point, none of this was in my hands or his. Hospital security was called. The bottle was sealed. The sample was sent for emergency testing. Marcus was asked to leave the room. Before he went, he turned back and looked at me. A look I will never forget. No remorse, no sorrow, only resentment. You think you've won, he said under his breath. I didn't answer, because I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden. A few hours later, the doctor returned. His face was tense. The sample contains the same compound as before, he said, and the dosage is higher. I sank into a chair, my legs giving out. Ruth took my hand. Alyssa closed her eyes, tears spilling down her face. There was no doubt left. That night, when Marcus didn't return to the hospital, I knew he was doing the only thing he had left to do, preparing himself. But I also knew something else. From the moment that bottle shattered on the floor, the game was no longer under his control. The truth had been placed on the table, and no matter what Marcus did next, he was no longer the one directing this match. I sat beside Alyssa's bed, holding her hand, and whispered a promise. I'll see this through, because there are battles, not meant to be won, but meant to be ended the right way. Thank y'all for sticking with us all the way to this point. If you busy or gotta go right now, hit that like button so you can find this video easy later. All right, now, let's get back to the story. Marcus was arrested 2 days later. Not in some dramatic, movie-style scene. No sirens, no handcuffs in front of a crowd. Just a quiet Savannah morning, when 2 men in plain clothes knocked on the door of the house I had lived in for more than 30 years. I opened the door. I already knew why they were there. Marcus wasn't inside. He never came back to the hospital after the night the juice bottle was sealed, but he didn't get far. The evidence I had preserved, The food samples, lab reports, hospital hallway footage, the doctor's statements was enough for them to locate him within 48 hours. When I heard that Marcus had been taken into custody for questioning, I didn't feel the relief I expected. I felt empty. Alyssa lay in her hospital bed, slowly stabilizing. Her levels were coming down. The doctors said we had arrived just in time. A few more weeks, and things could have ended very differently. You saved your daughter, one doctor told me. I nodded, but deep down, I knew saving a life and healing a soul are not the same thing. On the day Marcus was formally questioned, Alyssa asked to see him. I argued against it. I didn't want her to look at that face even one more time. But Alyssa spoke to me calmly, so calmly it frightened me. Mom, she said, I need to know. If I don't, I'll blame myself forever. We met Marcus in a small, cold room. The white lights made everything look pale and unreal. Marcus had lost weight. The confidence was gone. The polite smile was gone. What remained was a man forced to face what he had done. He looked at Alyssa first, then at me. I never hated her, Marcus said, his voice rough. I just didn't see another option. No other option, I repeated. Other than killing my daughter, Marcus lowered his head. I didn't plan to kill her. I just needed time. I needed her weak. I needed control. Alyssa broke down, not from fear, but from disillusionment. How is that love? She asked. Loving me while letting me disappear day by day. Marcus didn't answer, and I realized then. The trial happened months later. I won't go into details, not because I want to hide them, but because some memories still hurt exactly the way they did the first day. Marcus pleaded guilty, not out of remorse, but because the evidence was impossible to deny. When the sentence was handed down, Alyssa held my hand tightly. She was shaking. We walked out beneath a pale gray sky. Savannah was busy as ever. People walking, laughing, living their lives. No one knew that a family had just been broken in a way that could never be repaired. The months that followed were the hardest. Alyssa recovered physically, but not mentally. She startled awake at night. She feared food, feared things that once felt safe. Sometimes she looked at me and asked, Mom, how didn't I see it? I had no answer. Because the most painful truth of this story isn't Marcus. It's this. The person who harms you is often the one you trust the most. I sold the old house a year later. Not because I hated it, but because I couldn't keep living in a place where every corner of the kitchen carried memories of meals that once meant love and then became danger. We moved to another city. We started over, slowly, carefully, less trusting than before. I still cook. But I always eat with Alyssa. We look at each other while we eat, just to be sure we're still here. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think about Marcus, not with hatred, but with a question that will never have an answer. When does a person decide that another human life is just a means to an end? And then I think about what chills me most of all. If I hadn't opened that bag, if I had ignored that thin layer of gray powder, if I had chosen to trust appearances one more time. I don't let myself finish that thought, because this story isn't about one evil man. It's about the tiny signs we so often overlook, the times we tell ourselves, it's probably nothing, the moments we choose silence because we're afraid of causing trouble, and sometimes that silence almost kills the person we love most. I'm not sharing this story to shock you. I'm sharing it to ask you something very simple. If it were you, would you notice sooner? Or would you believe until it was too late? Leave a comment below. I truly want to read your thoughts and your stories. And if this story stayed with you, please like and follow the channel, because out there are many more stories. Stories about family, betrayal, and truths that only surface after everything has already changed forever. Thank you for staying with me until the very last moment.